So let's go talk about a little industry cluster. So we talk about how we identify those base industries, right? So the cluster is kind of like the next step in this evolution of our how we're actually going to do this type of analysis. So there are basically three things you need to know about regional economies, how they're built. There are three principles. There's going to be one: agglomeration, specialization, and competitiveness. So let's go back. Alfred Marshall, back in 1890, was the person who developed this concept of the agglomeration economies. And he was the first person to basically notice that firms and people actually benefit from being brought together because it brought several efficiencies. It had lower transportation costs, boosts in productivity, and higher wages. We live in a time right now where we have the what I call the superstar and the distressed areas of the nation, and usually the rural areas are the ones that are distressed, and it's part because of this effect. A lot of these companies like to locate in dense urban areas because they're gonna get all these boosts in productivity and higher wages. So one of the agglomerations is like, what is the best example? Is the mall. Those of us that grew up in the 1980s usually were assiduous visitors to malls, probably. And the mall is an agglomeration. It's a bunch of stores that decided to get together because they actually were able to say, hey, I have one parking lot. When I gotta go park my car, and then I go in, I can go to the food court, or I can go to the movies, or I can go to my big chain store or the smaller stores. And there's actually gonna be it's a benefit because even if you are a competitor, it will still, even if you're the old days when you had J.C. Penney and Sears, and I'm dating myself when I'm talking about these companies because we know they're not what they used to be. But even though they were direct competitors, maybe you were going to Sears, you didn't find what you wanted, and you went to J.C. Penney. Maybe after that, you went to the food court and got some treats for your kid. Or basically say, hey, I need to buy a gift, and you decide to go to one of the smaller stores. That's the efficiency you get from an agglomeration economy. So economic specialization is very important that you get this. And this is why regional economic development is so important. Our region is usually gonna specialize in different type of activities and industries. A lot of this is gonna be influenced by both geography and history. And this is something I teach my students for economic development at UCF, is you need to understand economic activity does not happen in a vacuum. That place where this economic activity is located had either natural attributes or it went through specific stages in history that led it to be what it is today. So let's talk about that. I love the example of Rochester, New York. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Rochester is one of those what you call legacy cities in New York State. It's considered the birthplace of optics in North America. And the reason why this is because they had a lot of companies headquartered within the area that sort of specialize in working with lenses. You had Kodak, which did like photography company, Bosch and Love, and you had Xerox. So what happens even if those companies lose their luster and they employ less people, the skills stayed within the cluster and the cluster evolves. Even though Kodak is not what it was, definitely not what it was in its heyday, Rochester he still has a very robust photonics and imaging sector, about $3.5 billion. It's calculated. So to like supplement this, I wanted to show you the I-4 corridor. So what we did here is basically we went through the four metros that comprise the I-4 corridor area. You probably will spend about 2 hours and a half, 3 hours going all the way from Daytona all the way to Tampa, pretty much. But even though these are very contiguous areas, notice that their location quotients are very different. We only pick the location quotients with the highest percentage. So you see somewhere like Deltona is basically the Daytona Beach area racetrack is NASCAR. We know that. So that's at 27.66. Orlando is amusement theme park, still leisures, but that's a 40.3 location quotient, employing about 78,000 people. That's a lot. But then you go to Lakeland in Polk County, and you see that the whole thing changes, and the concentration is even bigger. It's at one allocation quotient of 120.24, but it's phosphatic fertilizer manufacturing. You're probably not gonna find that because it's a very specific industry for that part of Florida. You're not gonna find many locations that have that specific geographic feature. But then look at Tampa. And I cannot tell what other leather and allied product manufacturing is, but it still employed a robust 500 people, and it had a 4.33. But what I wanted to show you this is that this is why it's very important to understand that regions work different from each other. And that's why it's not a good idea to just put a top-notch approach at the state level of economic development, because these regions are going to be completely different. They'll have some similarities, but what's driving their economies is very different. And this is all about competitiveness. Competitiveness is the whole idea how you attract and maintain this number of firms. And at the same time, what you want is just so they can go and increase the standards of living in your region. And when we talk about competitiveness, the biggest driver is innovation. And a lot of people like to use that nomenclature like crazy, but we're going to have talk a little about what we mean by innovation a little later. But this speaks about why the cluster concept is very important. This was actually brought up in the 90s by Michael Porter from Harvard University. So the cluster is actually defined as a geographic concentration of interconnected firms and institutions in a particular field. And I'm basically reading from the slide because all these words that you see here are very important. And the idea of the cluster is that you are going to be developing synergies between all these companies working together. Even though they're like, they might be competitors, but it's more like a frenemy type of relationship. Yeah, they know that some employees will jump ship and some employees will decide that to start their own companies, but that's the synergy because it helps that they're all there because it's going to provide them with a competitive advantage that they wouldn't have if they were by themselves. So again, very important. I gave you a definition. Now we're going to look at characteristics. And this is very important because if you're in the world of economic development, people are tend to throw the term clusters like it's bread and butter, and it's not like that. Cluster, the real cluster has certain characteristics, and it should meet some of these at least. One is co-location. That means they're gonna be next to each other. Concentration, again, that location quotient should show some type of export activity. Specialization, you should see that the region is actually really specializing in that product. Interconnectedness is about the relationship within the different firms. Those firms are actually going to be very diverse. They will all be firms, but they might be support institutions. That again, that export capacity is very important, and they should have a high level of innovation. That's what you really want the cluster to look like.